At Christmas dinner, my 9-year-old son got a plate of cold leftovers while everyone ate hot food. They said he should be grateful. He whispered, "Dad, do the thing you promised." 5 minutes later, my mother-in-law's face went white and the table erupted in chaos. Hey Reddit, my mother-in-law served my kid cold leftovers at Christmas dinner while everyone else got a hot meal. Told him to be grateful for scraps. So I kept the promise I made to my son and walked out. She thought family loyalty would keep me in line. A divorce lawyer disagreed. So I'm Jake, 34, been running an auto repair shop in Pine Ridge, Wisconsin for the past 12 years. Started from nothing, built it up myself, work 70-hour weeks sometimes. The kind of job where your hands are permanently stained with grease and you smell like motor oil even after 3 showers. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps a roof over my family's head. When I started the shop at 22, I was a kid with more ambition than sense. Took out a business loan, worked 16-hour days, learned everything myself because I couldn't afford help. First year, I made less than minimum wage, but I was building something mine. By year 5, I'd paid off the loan and the shop was turning real profit. Now I've got 4 mechanics, steady contracts, and a reputation for quality work. We're doing okay. Better than okay. Been married to Lauren for 12 years. Met her at a summer festival when I was 22, and stupid enough to think love conquered all. She was visiting from Madison, staying with her aunt for the summer, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Dark hair, bright smile, laughed at my terrible jokes. We spent that whole summer together. By September, I was sure I'd found my person. We got married that December because when you're young and in love, waiting seems pointless. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way she'd get quiet when I talked about the shop. The way she'd change the subject when I mentioned plans for the future. The way she never quite defended me when her family made their comments. But when you're 22 and convinced you found your soulmate, you don't see red flags. You see challenges you'll overcome together. The real problem started about a week after the wedding when I got to know Patricia properly. Patricia Bennett was a professional at making you feel small while pretending to care. Every insult came wrapped in concern. Every criticism disguised as helpful advice. She'd perfected this skill over decades, and she wielded it like a surgeon with a scalpel. Precise, deliberate, designed to cut deep without leaving visible scars. She'd worked as a regional manager for some insurance company for 30 years. Retired at 55, with a solid pension and enough money to live comfortably in that big house on Maple Street. The kind of house with a formal dining room nobody actually uses, and white carpets that make you nervous just looking at them. Her second husband, Todd, was a consultant who traveled for work constantly. Nice enough guy on his own, but he'd learned early to just agree with Patricia and stay out of her way. Lauren's biological father had left when she was 12. Classic midlife crisis story. Ran off with someone from his office, moved to Florida, barely stayed in touch. Patricia had raised Lauren and her brother Kyle, mostly alone while building her career, and she never let anyone forget it. Every conversation eventually circled back to her sacrifices. The long hours she'd worked, the opportunities she'd given up, how she'd single-handedly raised 2 successful kids with no help from anyone. I respected that initially. Single mother making it work while climbing the corporate ladder? That takes real strength. But over time I realized Patricia didn't want respect. She wanted control. She'd paid her dues raising kids alone, and now everyone in her orbit owed her eternal gratitude and complete compliance. First time she came to visit our apartment, maybe 4 days after the wedding, I knew we were in trouble. She walked through our little 2-bedroom place like a health inspector at a failing restaurant, touched our secondhand couch with just her fingertips, looked at our thrift store coffee table with this expression like she smelled something bad, checked the kitchen with pursed lips, stood in the bathroom doorway without actually going in. Finally, she sat down on that couch with visible reluctance and delivered the line that would set the tone for the next 12 years. Well, it's cozy. You'll want something bigger once you get a real career going, Jake. I laughed it off, made some joke about how we were just starting out. Lauren squeezed my hand hard under the table, her signal for drop it. I dropped it. But Patricia wasn't done. She mentioned the neighborhood wasn't great, said the building looked like it had maintenance issues, wondered out loud how we could possibly plan for a family in such a small space. Each comment delivered with that same concerned smile, that same tone that made you question if she was insulting you or just being practical. The comments never stopped. They just multiplied and evolved. When I told her about my plan to open the repair shop, she said, "How ambitious. Though the failure rate for small businesses is quite high. I hope you're prepared for that reality." When I signed the lease on the shop space, she said, "Renting. Probably wise for now." When I paid off the business loan 2 years early after busting my rear working 80-hour weeks, she said, "It's nice that you're self-employed. No corporate ladder to worry about climbing." When we bought our first house, Patricia walked through making actual notes on a pad. "The bones are good. You'll want to gut the kitchen eventually. But yes, I suppose it's a start for you too." A start. Everything I accomplished was just a preliminary step towards something that might actually matter someday. The worst was when Danny was born. I was in the hospital room holding my 3-hour-old son, crying because I'd never felt anything that powerful in my life. And Patricia looked at this perfect tiny human and said, "He's lovely. I do hope he has Lauren's drive and ambition. Boys really need that to succeed in this world." She looked at my newborn son and decided he'd probably turn out like me, which in Patricia's world meant he was already starting behind. Every family dinner, every holiday, every visit was another opportunity for these little cuts. Never anything big enough to call out directly. Never anything I could point to and say, "That was cruel," without sounding oversensitive. Just a constant drip of criticism disguised as concern. And Lauren's response was always, always the same. "That's just how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it. She's from a different generation. She's just trying to help. You're being too sensitive." But here's what I started to notice over the years. Patricia saved her sharpest comments for when Lauren wasn't in the room. Or she'd say things right in front of Lauren, but in that tone that made it sound like friendly advice instead of an insult. And Lauren would either miss it entirely or pretend she missed it. Either way, she never once stood up for me. Not once in 12 years. You know what the worst part was? I started to believe it. Not consciously. But somewhere deep down, Patricia's constant criticism started to take root. I'd look at the shop and think maybe it wasn't that impressive. Look at our house and see all the things that weren't updated instead of being proud we owned it. Look at my work-stained hands and wonder if Lauren regretted marrying a mechanic instead of some corporate guy in a suit. And Danny. God, Danny got the worst of it. Our son is 9 now. Small for his age, incredibly bright, loves to read and build things and ask questions about how everything works. Reminds me of myself at that age. Curious about the world. Eager to learn. The kind of kid teachers love because he actually cares about understanding things. But Patricia treated him exactly like she treated me. Every achievement came with a qualifier. Every accomplishment got diminished. When he won his school spelling bee in 3rd grade after studying those words for weeks, Patricia's response was, "Well, I imagine the competition wasn't very difficult at a school this size. Still, good job, I suppose." When his art teacher displayed his clay sculpture in the hallway because she thought it was genuinely impressive, Patricia said, "That's nice, dear. Though you really should focus more on activities that will help with college applications. Art is more of a hobby." The kid was 8 years old, and she was talking about college applications. When he got Student of the Month for September, Patricia said, "How many students are in your class?" "Oh, 22. So really it's just a matter of time before everyone gets it." Every single thing he did got dismissed as either easy, lucky, or not really that impressive. And I watched it do to him what it had done to me. Watched this bright, confident kid start to doubt himself. Start to apologize for being excited about things. Start to assume nothing he did would ever quite be good enough. Lauren saw it happening. Had to have seen it. But every time I brought it up, she'd defend her mother. She's just trying to help him set realistic expectations. She wants him to be prepared for how competitive the world is. You're being too sensitive on his behalf. Danny's fine. But Danny wasn't fine. I could see it in his eyes. The way he'd light up about something and then immediately dampen that excitement. The way he'd show me a drawing he was proud of and then say, "But it's not that good," before I could even respond. The way he'd flinch slightly when Patricia started talking, bracing for whatever criticism was coming. And I kept my mouth shut, kept the peace. Told myself it wasn't that bad, that Danny would toughen up, that eventually Patricia would ease off, until 3 months ago when everything changed. We were in the garage together on a Saturday. I was doing an oil change on Mrs. Thompson's Accord, and Danny was handing me tools, asking his usual questions about how engines work. Good kid stuff, father-son bonding, the kind of afternoon I lived for. He got quiet after a while. Then he asked the question that broke my heart. "Dad, why doesn't Grandma Patricia like me?" I put down the wrench and looked at my kid. 9 years old, grease smudge on his cheek, holding a socket wrench and trying not to cry. "She likes you, buddy." "No, she doesn't. She always says stuff that makes me feel bad. Like when I showed her my science project, and she said it was fine, but I should have done more research. Or when I made her that card for her birthday, and she said my handwriting looked messy. Or when I got the Student of the Month award, and she said everyone gets it eventually. He'd been keeping track, cataloging every criticism, carrying them around like weights in his pockets. Sometimes people show they care in weird ways, I said, knowing it was a weak answer, even as the words left my mouth. But it doesn't feel like she cares. It feels like she thinks I'm not good enough. And there it was. The thing I'd been avoiding seeing for 9 years. My son felt exactly the way I'd felt for 12 years. Not good enough. Never good enough. Constantly failing to meet standards that shifted just out of reach every time you got close. I pulled him into a hug right there in the garage, getting motor oil all over both of us. Listen to me. You are good enough. You're smart and kind and curious and creative. Some people in this world won't see that. And that's their problem, not yours. But she's family. Isn't family supposed to see the good stuff? Man, the wisdom of kids asking the questions adults are too afraid to face. Yeah, they're supposed to. Danny pulled back and looked at me with these serious eyes that no 9-year-old should have. Will you stand up for me if she does it again? Really stand up for me? Not just tell her to be nice? That's when I made the promise. The promise that would end my marriage and start the hardest 6 months of my life. If she ever hurts you again, really hurts you, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, even if it makes people mad, even if it causes problems. You're my son, and nobody gets to make you feel small. Nobody. Deal? Deal. We shook on it like two men making a business agreement. His hand was small in mine, still had that kid's softness, but his grip was firm. He believed me, trusted me to keep that promise. I thought maybe Patricia would ease up. Maybe I'd never have to actually follow through. Maybe things would get better on their own. 3 months later, Christmas dinner proved me wrong in the worst possible way. Patricia had insisted on hosting Christmas at her place like she did every year. Big house, formal dining room, the whole production. Lauren's brother Kyle was there with his wife and their 2 kids. Todd was there doing his usual fade-into-the-background routine. And of course, Patricia was in full hostess mode, running the show like a general commanding troops. The day had been tense from the start. Patricia made comments about the gifts we brought being nice, but not quite what she would have chosen. Pointed out that Danny's hair needed a trim. Mentioned I looked like I'd gained weight. Just her usual routine of small cuts disguised as observations. But dinner was when it all fell apart. Everyone gathered in that formal dining room with the fancy china that probably cost more than my truck. Patricia brought out food family style, making a big production of serving each person. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, 3 kinds of vegetables, rolls, the whole traditional Christmas spread. She served each person individually, asking about portions, making sure everyone got exactly what they wanted. Then she got to Danny. She went to the kitchen and came back with a plate, set it in front of him with this smile, and my stomach dropped. The plate was from the refrigerator. Cold turkey, cold mashed potatoes that had that dried out look, cold green beans, leftovers from something she'd made days ago, still in that crusty state that only happens when food sits in the fridge too long. Everyone at the table went silent, all eyes on that plate, then quickly looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. There you go, sweetie, Patricia said, still smiling. I know you're a picky eater, so I saved you some simple food. Nothing too overwhelming. Danny stared at his plate, then looked at everyone else's plates piled high with hot, fresh food. Then back at his own cold plate. His face went red. His hands started to shake slightly. Grandma, can I have hot food like everyone else? This is perfectly good food, Danny. Some children don't get any Christmas dinner at all. You should be grateful for what you have. The table stayed silent. Nobody said a word. Kyle looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up. Todd studied his own plate intensely. Lauren opened her mouth but closed it again without saying anything. And Danny, my 9-year-old son, looked at that cold plate and understood exactly what was happening. His grandmother had deliberately served him inferior food to teach him some lesson about being grateful, or knowing his place, or whatever twisted logic she'd used to justify it, in front of the whole family. On Christmas. He turned to me, tugged my sleeve, leaned close and whispered so only I could hear. Dad, can you do the thing you promised if they hurt me again? I looked at my kid, looked at that cold plate of leftovers, looked at Patricia sitting there with that satisfied expression, looked at Lauren who was staring at her own plate, refusing to meet my eyes, looked at Kyle and Todd and everyone else at that table who was going to pretend this was normal and fine and not incredibly messed up. And I thought about that promise in the garage 3 months ago. So I stood up. Get your coat, Danny. We're leaving. The table exploded. Patricia's face went from satisfied to shocked to outraged in about 2 seconds. Excuse me? I said we're leaving. Danny, go get your coat from the front closet. Jake, sit down. Lauren hissed across the table. You're making a scene. No, I'm keeping a promise to my son. Come on, buddy. Danny didn't need to be told twice. He pushed back from the table and headed for the front door, like the house was on fire. Patricia found her voice. How dare you? I spent all day preparing this dinner and you're going to storm out like a child over nothing. Over nothing? I turned to face her directly. You served my 9-year-old son cold leftovers from the refrigerator while everyone else got a hot meal. You did it deliberately. You wanted to teach him some lesson about being grateful by making him feel less than everyone else at this table. He's a picky eater. I was being considerate. That's a lie and you know it. He eats everything I make at home. He's not picky. You did this to hurt him, and you did it in front of everyone so he'd feel humiliated. Kyle jumped up. You don't talk to our mother like that. Your mother just emotionally abused my son at Christmas dinner. So yeah, I'm going to talk to her like that. Boys don't need to be coddled, Patricia said, her voice cold now. He needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around him. He's 9 years old. My voice rose for the first time. He's a kid, and you're supposed to be his grandmother. You're supposed to love him and support him, not tear him down at every opportunity. Lauren stood up. Jake, please. Let's just sit down and finish dinner. We can talk about this later. There's nothing to talk about. Your mother served your son cold food to humiliate him, and you sat there and let it happen, just like you always do, just like you've let her do to both of us for 12 years. Don't you dare blame me for your oversensitivity. Oversensitivity? Lauren, open your eyes. Look at that plate. Look at what your mother did and tell me that's normal. Tell me that's loving. Tell me that's okay. She couldn't. She just stood there with tears starting to form, mouth opening and closing, unable to form words that would make this anything other than what it was. Todd spoke up for the first time. Maybe everyone should just calm down and... No, I cut him off. We're not calming down. We're not pretending this is fine. We're not sitting back down like nothing happened. We're leaving. If you walk out that door, Patricia said, her voice like ice, don't expect to be welcomed back. I looked at her. This woman who'd spent 12 years making me feel worthless. Who'd started doing the same thing to my son. Who'd just served a child cold leftovers on Christmas to prove some twisted point about hierarchy and gratitude. Good. I wouldn't want to come back to a place where my son gets treated like garbage. Danny was waiting by the front door with his coat already on, eyes wide, watching this all unfold. Let's go, buddy. We walked out into the December cold, got in my truck, pulled out of that driveway with my phone already starting to buzz with incoming calls and texts. Are you mad at me? Danny asked quietly. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot, shifted into park, and turned to face him. Listen to me very carefully. I am not mad at you. I'm mad at them. What Grandma Patricia did tonight was wrong. She tried to make you feel small and worthless, and I will never let anyone do that to you. Not her, not anyone. You deserve better than that. You understand? He nodded, and I watched his whole body relax. Like he'd been holding his breath since we left. Where are we going? Somewhere that treats you like the amazing kid you are. We ended up at Betty's Diner on Highway 12, one of those old-school places with vinyl booths and a waitress who calls everyone hon. They were open on Christmas, serving turkey dinner for people who didn't have anywhere else to go. We sat in a booth in the back, ordered 2 specials, and had the best Christmas dinner of my life. Danny told me about the book he was reading, some fantasy thing with dragons and magic. I told him about a '67 Camaro I had in the shop that needed a complete engine rebuild. We talked about school and his friends and this kid in his class who was bullying people and how Danny had stood up to him. Normal dad and son conversation. The kind we should have been having all day instead of walking on eggshells around Patricia's toxic behavior. The food was good. The company was better. And for the first time in years, I felt like I'd done exactly the right thing. We got home around 9. Lauren's car was already in the driveway, and I knew what was coming. She was waiting in the living room, still in her Christmas dress, eyes red, expression hard. Soon as we walked in, she told Danny to go to his room without even looking at him. Danny glanced at me. I nodded. It's okay, buddy. Head upstairs. He went, but I knew he'd be sitting at the top of the stairs listening to every word. That's what I would have done at his age. Lauren waited until she heard his bedroom door close. How could you humiliate my family like that? I didn't humiliate anyone. Your mother did that herself. That's your version. That's what happened. She served Danny cold leftovers while everyone else got a hot meal. She did it deliberately to hurt him. She was trying to teach him a lesson about being grateful. He's 9 years old, Lauren. He doesn't need lessons about gratitude delivered through humiliation. He needs to know his family loves him and values him. Your mother did the exact opposite. I was trying to keep the peace. At the cost of our son's dignity, at the cost of his self-worth, how many times are you going to sacrifice him to make your mother happy? Her face flushed. Don't you turn this around on me. You're the one who caused a scene. You're the one who insulted my mother in her own home. You're the one who dragged Danny out of there to prove some point. Someone had to protect him since you clearly weren't going to. The words landed like a slap. Lauren's face went pale, then red again with anger. How dare you question my love for my son? I'm not questioning your love. I'm questioning your judgment, your priorities. Every single time there's a conflict between your mother and your family, you choose her. Every single time. That is not true. So I laid it all out. Every incident over the past 9 years. Every time Patricia had torn Danny down, and Lauren had defended it as constructive criticism. The spelling bee that wasn't impressive because the school was small. The art project that was nice but not practical. The Student of the Month award that everyone gets eventually. The handwriting that needed work. The birthday card that wasn't quite good enough. Every moment that should have been celebrated that got diminished instead. And tonight, I finished. Tonight she served him cold food on Christmas and called it a lesson. And you said nothing. You sat there and let it happen because standing up to your mother is more uncomfortable than watching your son get hurt. Lauren was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was shaking. If you hate my family so much, maybe you should leave. I looked at my wife, searched her face for any sign she didn't mean it, but her expression was set, determined. She'd made her choice, just like she'd made it every time for the past 12 years. Her mother over her husband, her mother over her son, her mother over everything. You want me to leave? I want you to figure out if you can be part of this family without constantly attacking my mother. I defended our son. That's not attacking. It is to her. It is to me. Do you know what she said after you left? She cried, Jake. She actually cried. Said she was trying her best to be a good grandmother, and you made her feel like a monster. I laughed. Bitter sound with zero humor. She's crying because for the first time in 12 years, someone stood up to her. That's not being victimized. That's being held accountable. Get out, Lauren said quietly. Lauren, my fiancé, said, I'm taking my sister to the concert instead of you. She deserves it more. I bought those tickets for her birthday, so I let her go have fun while I dismantled everything between us. When she came home and saw what I'd done, she lost her mind. Hey, Reddit. My fiancé decided to take her sister to the concert with the tickets I bought for her birthday. I didn't say anything. Just waited until she left and did what needed to be done. She came home to an empty apartment and a note. Let me back up a bit so you understand how I ended up here. Name's Jensen, 28 male. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood outside of Cleveland. Dad was a machinist who worked the same factory for 32 years. Mom was an ER nurse who pulled double shifts to make sure we never went without. They taught me two things that stuck. Work hard and don't let anyone treat you like a doormat. Dad used to say that respect isn't given, it's established. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. I thought I got that. Turns out, knowing something and actually living it are two different things. I work in logistics and supply chain coordination for a regional distribution company. I spent my days managing freight schedules, negotiating rates with carriers, tracking shipments across 3 time zones, and fixing problems that happened when trucks broke down in the middle of nowhere. It was stressful work, the kind that gives you gray hairs at 25, but it paid well. I pulled in about 75 grand a year, which in our city meant I could afford a solid 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood and still put money away for the future. I met Fiona at a friend's wedding 4 years before the incident. She was a bridesmaid. I knew the groom from college. She was stunning in that way where she didn't seem to be trying too hard. Dark hair, bright eyes, a laugh that made you want to be funnier. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she focused on you. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I did the whole thing right. Asked her father's permission. Planned a trip to this overlook spot where we'd had our first real date. Got down on one knee with my grandmother's ring. She said yes. Cried. We celebrated. I thought I'd found my person. Fiona was 27. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a yoga studio downtown, maybe 20 hours a week. The rest of her time went into building her online presence as a lifestyle influencer. She had about 6,000 followers on Instagram when we got engaged, which she treated like she was on the verge of being discovered by some major brand any day now. I supported it. I paid for the ring light, the camera equipment, the backdrop for her photos, the subscription boxes she'd unbox on video. I figured she was chasing a dream, and that's what partners do. We moved in together 3 months after the engagement. The apartment was in my name because Fiona's credit was wrecked from some old student loans she'd defaulted on during her early 20s. She'd gone to a private college for communications, dropped out after 2 years, and the debt followed her around. No big deal, I figured. We were getting married anyway. I signed the lease solo, put the utilities in my name, handled the internet account. She was just an occupant on paper. Fiona said she was lucky to have me. At the time, I thought that was sweet. Looking back, I realized she was just relieved to find someone willing to carry the load. For the first 6 months, things were genuinely good. We found our rhythm. I worked long hours. She did her content creation thing. We spent weekends together exploring the city or binging shows on the couch. I paid most of the bills because I made more money and she was building her brand. I didn't mind. That's what you do when you're building a life with someone. Then Bridget showed up, Fiona's older sister. She was 30, divorced about a year prior, and had recently moved back to our city after burning through all her options elsewhere. She was one of those people who peaked in high school and spent the rest of her life trying to get back to that feeling. Former homecoming queen, head cheerleader, dated the quarterback, the whole thing. She married her college boyfriend at 22 in this huge wedding that her parents went into debt for. The marriage lasted 7 years before he finally got tired of being treated like a personal assistant who she occasionally slept with. I met the ex-husband once, briefly, at a family barbecue before the divorce was finalized. His name was Evan. He told me out of earshot of the family to watch how Bridget treated service workers. Said it would tell me everything I needed to know about the family dynamics. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. From what I gathered through various family conversations, Evan had asked for the divorce, not Bridget. He'd been planning his exit for over a year, quietly separating finances. When he finally pulled the trigger, Bridget was blindsided. She got the house in the settlement, sold it within 2 months, and blew through the money in about 6 more on. After that, she was between opportunities, which was her way of saying unemployed and too proud to admit it. She crashed with friends in her old city for a few months, burned those bridges, then rotated through various family members. By the time she moved back to our city and landed on our couch, she'd already worn out her welcome with 2 aunts and her parents. She hadn't held a real job in months and showed no signs of looking for one. The dynamic was toxic from day one. She had this way of making everything about her. If Fiona had a good day at work, Bridget had a story about how her day was harder. If I mentioned anything about my job, about the stress or the wins or anything at all, she would roll her eyes and make some comment about how corporate jobs were soul-crushing prisons for people without creativity. She didn't have a job herself, mind you. Hadn't had one since before the divorce finalized. But she had plenty of opinions about mine. She showed up 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes more. She'd let herself in with the spare key Fiona had given her without asking me. She'd eat food from our fridge, stuff I'd bought on my grocery runs. She'd leave dishes in the sink for days. She'd hog our TV watching whatever reality show she was into. She barely acknowledged my existence unless she needed something. 3 months into this arrangement, I'd had enough. I waited until one evening when Bridget had left, and I pulled Fiona aside. "Look," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I get that she's your sister, and she's going through a rough patch. But this has been going on for months. She's here all the time. She eats our food. She uses our utilities. Can we maybe set some limits? Like a schedule for visits? Or a timeline for when she's going to find her own place?" Fiona's face went cold immediately. "She's family, Jensen. She's going through the worst time of her life. Her marriage fell apart. She lost her house. I can't believe you're being this selfish." "I'm not being selfish. I'm asking for basic boundaries. She ate an entire rotisserie chicken yesterday. By herself. That was supposed to be dinner for 2 nights. You're being petty. It's just food. I'm being practical. We're supposed to be saving for a wedding. We talked about a venue deposit next month. I can't save money when I'm feeding 3 people on 1 income while she contributes nothing. So this is about money. Nice?" She crossed her arms. "Real nice. It's about respect. I kept my voice level, even though I wanted to yell. She doesn't respect our space, our time, or our relationship. She makes comments about my job. She leaves her stuff everywhere. She never says thank you for anything." Fiona didn't respond for a long moment. Then she hit me with the line that should have sent me running. "If you really loved me, you'd understand that family comes first. Always. Bridget won't be here forever. She just needs time to get back on her feet. If you can't handle supporting my family during a hard time, then maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did." I dropped it. That was my first major mistake. Not because I was wrong, but because I let her twist reasonable boundaries into some kind of character flaw. That's how it starts. They test you with small stuff, see what you'll put up with, then push a little further. and a little further. One time, about 5 months in, Bridget borrowed my car because hers was in the shop, said she needed it for a job interview. I found out later there was no interview. She'd driven 40 miles to meet some guy from a dating app, racked up a parking ticket downtown, and returned my car with the gas light on. When I mentioned the ticket, she laughed and said I could probably afford it. Nothing changed after my conversation with Fiona. If anything, Bridget's presence got worse. There was a guy at my job named Owen. He was about 40, worked in vendor relations, and he was one of those people who seemed to know everyone in a 3-state radius. 20 years in the logistics industry meant he had contacts everywhere. Trucking companies, warehouse managers, port authorities, venue operators. You name it. If there was a connection to be made, Owen had probably already made it over lunch at some industry conference. More importantly, Owen was a genuinely good guy. He'd taken me under his wing when I started at the company, back when I was a 24-year-old kid. We grabbed lunch together at least once a week, and those conversations were often the best part of my day. Owen had also been through his own divorce about 8 years back. His ex-wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the fallout had nearly destroyed him. He'd remarried a woman who actually appreciated him, and came out the other side with a lot of hard-won wisdom about relationships. He never said anything directly about Fiona and Bridget, but I could tell from the way he'd raise his eyebrows during my stories that he saw where this was heading long before I did. About 6 weeks before Fiona's birthday, Owen and I were grabbing lunch at this taco place near the office. I mentioned I was trying to find tickets to see the Midnight Echo. They were this indie synth-pop band that had been underground for years before their third album went viral. Fiona was obsessed with them. She'd been playing their music constantly, had their poster in our apartment, followed every member on social media. They were doing a single show in our city as part of their tour, and tickets had sold out in literally minutes. Scalpers were asking $700 or $800 per ticket, which was insane for a band most people had never heard of 2 years ago. Owen leaned back in his chair. My brother-in-law works event security at that venue. Let me make a call. I told him not to go out of his way, but Owen was already texting. A week and a half later, Owen came through. 2 floor seats, not VIP but solid placement, for $450 total. Face value. In a market where scalpers were gouging people for 3 times that amount, this was huge. He wouldn't even let me pay him back for making the calls. You sure about this? He asked when he handed me the tickets. Big gesture for someone who's got her sister camped out on your couch. I told him it would be fine, that this was about me and Fiona, not Bridget. Owen just nodded, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Said watching me try to navigate this relationship was payment enough. I kept the tickets secret for 3 weeks. The concert was scheduled for the Saturday after Fiona's birthday, which fell on a Wednesday. My plan was to give them to her on her actual birthday, so she'd have a few days to get excited. We'd make a whole night of it. Dinner at her favorite restaurant beforehand, the show, maybe dessert after at that rooftop spot she'd been wanting to try. Just the 2 of us. No Bridget, a real date night for the first time in months. Wednesday came. I left work early, stopped by her favorite bakery and picked up a small cake. I had the tickets printed out in an envelope with a card I'd written myself. Something simple about how much I loved her and how I couldn't wait to share this experience together. I got home around 5 p.m. Bridget was there. Of course she was. She was sprawled on my couch in what I'm pretty sure was Fiona's robe, scrolling through her phone with her feet on my coffee table. She didn't look up when I walked in. Fiona was in the bedroom doing her makeup for a birthday dinner we had planned with friends later that evening. Hey, I said, setting down the cake and sliding the envelope across the dresser. Happy birthday. Open this one first. She picked it up with curiosity. When she pulled out the tickets, her whole face lit up. Eyes wide, mouth open, genuine shock. No way. The Echo? Floor seats? These are sold out everywhere. How did you even get these? I know a guy, I said, enjoying her reaction. I thought we could make a real night of it. Dinner beforehand? The show? Maybe grab dessert after at that rooftop place you wanted to try. She jumped up and hugged me. For about 30 seconds, maybe 45, everything felt like it used to. Like we were actually a couple who loved each other, instead of 2 people going through the motions while her sister ate all our food. Then Bridget appeared in the doorway. What's going on? She asked, leaning against the doorframe with that annoyed look. Jensen got me tickets to the Midnight Echo, Fiona said, holding them up. Floor seats. For Saturday. Bridget's face went through a whole thing that I watched in real time. Surprise, then jealousy, then something that made my stomach tighten. She pushed off the doorframe and walked closer, actually taking one of the tickets from Fiona's hand to look at it. Oh my God, she breathed. You know I've been dying to see them, right? Remember, we used to listen to their first album in my car in high school? Before they were famous? This was our thing. I watched the shift happen. Fiona's eyes moved between me and her sister. I remember, she said slowly. I caught the look they exchanged, but I didn't say anything because I figured even Fiona wouldn't be that bold. I was dead wrong. The conversation happened 2 days later, on Friday night. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Pasta with a creamy tomato sauce from scratch, garlic bread, Caesar salad. Bridget had been over every single day since the birthday, which wasn't unusual, but the vibe was different. She and Fiona kept having these hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. Around 7 p.m., Fiona came into the kitchen. So I've been thinking about tomorrow, she started, leaning against the counter. I stirred the sauce. What about it? Bridget is really struggling right now. The divorce stuff, not having her own place, the job search that keeps going nowhere. She's been really down lately. Okay. And you know how much she loves the Echo. They were her favorite band before they were mine. She's the one who got me into their music back in high school. I put the spoon down and turned to face her. I could feel where this was going. Where is this going, Fiona? She did this dramatic sigh. I think I should take Bridget to the concert instead of you. I stared at her. She needs this more than you do, she continued. You don't even know all their songs. You're just going to stand there while Bridget and I actually connect with the music. She's been through so much, and this could really boost her mood. She needs a win. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. Let me make sure I'm hearing this right, I said. I spent $450 on tickets for your birthday. I called in a favor from a coworker who went out of his way to help. I planned a date night for us. And you want to bring your sister instead? You're making it sound worse than it is. How should it sound? She huffed, annoyed. It's my gift. I should get to decide what I do with it. And if you really loved me, you'd want me to have the best time possible. Bridget will appreciate it more than you will. She actually gets the music. I felt something shift in my chest, like everything finally snapping into focus after staring at a blurry picture for 2 years. What about what I want? I asked. What about the fact that I wanted to spend this night with you? That I planned this for us to actually have time together? Don't be selfish, Jensen. Bridget is family. She's blood. You and I can do something else some other time. There it was. I would always be below her sister. The guy who paid the bills and bought the gifts ranked lower than the woman who contributed nothing and took everything. Something just switched off inside me. Fine, I said. I turned back to the stove. Take Bridget. If that's what you want, go ahead. She blinked, surprised by how fast I gave in. Really? You're okay with it? Yeah. She rushed over and hugged me from behind. I stood there, stiff, staring at the sauce bubbling on the stove. Thank you so much. I knew you'd get it. You're the best. M. She was already pulling out her phone to text Bridget the good news. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of sadness, but because I was planning. See, here's what Fiona didn't know, or didn't bother to think about. The apartment was in my name. The lease, the utilities, the internet, everything. When we'd moved in together, her credit was too wrecked to be on anything official. She was just an occupant. I'd asked Owen's brother, who was a lawyer, about my situation early on. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. He told me I was on solid ground, though he reminded me every situation is different. The engagement ring was also still legally mine. She'd pushed for us to get it appraised and added to her insurance policy, but I dragged my feet on the paperwork. Kept saying I'd get to it next week. The ring was a family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond reset with a new band. My mother had given it to me with the understanding that if the engagement didn't work out, it came back to the family. It was worth about $8,000, and it was currently sitting in Fiona's jewelry box. Saturday morning, I called in sick to work. Fiona was at the yoga studio until noon, covering someone's shift. Bridget was wherever Bridget went when she wasn't on my couch. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and started making calls. First call was to Owen. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the other end. She did what? Owen finally said. She's taking her sister. The sister who's been crashing on our couch rent-free for 8 months. He let out a slow breath. What do you need? I need to know if your wife's cousin still manages that apartment complex on the east side, the one with the month-to-month leases. 3 hours later, I had signed a lease for a one-bedroom unit starting that day. First month plus security deposit came out to about $1,900. I wrote the check without blinking. Second call was to my landlord. Our current lease had rolled month to month after the first year, which means I could get out with 30 days' notice. I called Dominic, explained I needed out now, and offered to pay a full month's rent as a penalty plus forfeit my security deposit. You sure about this? Dominic asked. Sounds pretty final. I'm very sure. There was a pause. I'll have the place listed by Tuesday. Keys in the Dropbox by Sunday night. Third call was to a moving company that specialized in rush jobs. Saturday evening service while she was at the concert. 3 guys, 4 hours, $1,100. Then there was the ring. Fiona had this habit of taking it off when she showered. She kept it in her jewelry box on the dresser, right next to the perfume bottles and the earring tree. I waited until she was in the bathroom getting ready for the concert. I walked into the bedroom, opened the jewelry box, and took my grandmother's ring. I slipped it into my pocket and walked out. She never noticed. The afternoon dragged. Fiona was buzzing around the apartment trying on different outfits, video calling Bridget to coordinate their looks. She tried on 3 different dresses before settling on the black one I'd bought her for our anniversary dinner 6 months ago. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, mentally running through everything in the apartment that belonged to me. Couch, TV, dining table and chairs, bed frame and mattress, the kitchen equipment, all mine. Fiona's contributions to the place were her clothes, her makeup, her yoga mats, and the pile of stuff Bridget had accumulated over 8 months of squatting. She arrived around 5 p.m. She walked in without knocking, like always, and barely glanced my way. "Ready?" she asked Fiona. "Almost." Fiona came out of the bedroom. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. She paused, looking back at me on the couch. "We'll probably get food after the show, so don't wait up. There's leftovers in the fridge." "Have fun," I said. It was the last fun she was ever going to have at my expense. The moving crew arrived at 6:30 p.m., exactly when I told them to. 3 guys in a white box truck. The foreman was a big dude named Ray, who looked like someone who'd loaded 1,000 apartments and nothing fazed him anymore. Graybeard, forearms like tree trunks. I met them in the parking lot and shook hands. "So what's the deal?" Ray asked as we walked toward the building. "Just so I know what we're working with." I told him about it. Then I walked them through the apartment, pointing out what went and what stayed. "Everything except the stuff in that corner," I said, gesturing to Fiona's belongings. "That stays. Everything else goes." Ray looked at the pile, then scanned the rest of the apartment. "The couch alone is probably worth more than all that combined." I'm aware. They worked fast. Within 90 minutes, the living room was stripped. Couch, gone. TV, gone. Coffee table, entertainment center, bookshelves, all loaded into the truck. The dining room went next. Table, chairs, the nice light fixture I'd bought to replace the ugly one the apartment came with. By 9 p.m., the apartment looked like a crime scene. Empty walls, dust outlines where furniture used to be. The only things remaining were Fiona's belongings, and one folding chair I left in the middle of the living room. I did a final sweep, checked every drawer, every closet, every cabinet, made sure I hadn't left anything behind that mattered. Then I got to the bathroom. I took the nice towels, the ones I'd bought at a home goods store when we moved in. I took the shower curtain. I took the bath mat and the toilet paper, because I'd just bought a 24-pack the week before, and I wasn't leaving that behind. I sat down at the kitchen counter, the only surface left in the apartment, and wrote the note on the back of an old electric bill. "Fiona, she can have the tickets, and you can have the life you actually wanted. The lease is terminated. Dominic will be here Monday at 9 a.m. for the walkthrough. You have until then to get your stuff out. Do not contact me. The engagement is over. The ring belongs to my family and is back where it belongs. Good luck, Jensen." I left the note next to her keys. Then I locked the door, walked downstairs, and dropped my keys in Dominic's Dropbox. I drove to my new apartment, unpacked the essentials, ordered Chinese food from a place that delivered late, sat on my couch in my new quiet living room, and ate Kung Pao chicken while blocking every number I could think of. Fiona, Bridget, their mother, their aunt who I'd met once at Thanksgiving, every mutual friend who might try to play peacemaker. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. Best sleep I'd had in 2 years. The fallout started Sunday morning. Owen called me around 10 a.m., sounding impressed. "So it's done?" he asked. "It's done. Good for you, man. Seriously, that took guts. But you know she's gonna come after you, right?" "I know. I'm ready." What I wasn't ready for was how fast they got organized. Around 2 p.m., I got a knock on my door. I hadn't told anyone my new address except Owen, my parents, and my landlord. I looked through the peephole and saw Fiona's mother, Michelle. I didn't open the door. "I know you're in there, Nathan." She knocked again, harder. "We need to talk about what you did to my daughter. She's sitting in an empty apartment with no furniture and nowhere to go. This is not how grown-ups handle problems." I stayed quiet. The knocking continued for about 10 minutes. She gave me a whole lecture through the door about responsibility, about commitment, about how I owed Fiona an explanation at the very least. When I didn't respond, she slipped a note under the door. This isn't over. You owe Fiona an apology and the ring. Call me when you're ready to act like a man. I threw it in the trash. The next morning at work, I told Owen what happened with Michelle. He shook his head. They tracked you down that fast? Her husband works for the city. Probably ran my new address through some database. I don't know. Doesn't matter. She can knock all she wants. Owen leaned back in his chair. You know what this means, right? They're freaking out. They expected you to cave. You didn't. Now they've got nothing. He was dead on. Everything that happened after that had the energy of people making it up as they went. Monday was more interesting. I got to work around 7:30, figuring an early start would help me focus. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from building security. There's a woman at reception asking for you. Says she's your fiancé. Ex-fiancé, I corrected. Don't let her up. I'll come down. I took the elevator to the lobby. Fiona was standing near the security desk looking rough. Hair unwashed, sweats, red eyes. Bridget was with her, arms crossed, looking like she wanted to throw hands. Jensen, we need to talk. No, we don't. You can't just do this. Her voice cracked. You can't disappear and leave me with nothing. We were supposed to get married. We were. Bridget stepped forward. You're crazy. Who does this? Who takes an engagement ring back? I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. We weren't married. It was a family heirloom that comes back if the engagement ends. It ended. The ring came back. You're gonna regret this, Bridget said. I doubt it. Fiona started crying. Jensen, please, I'm sorry. The concert thing was dumb, but you can't throw away 4 years over one mistake. I looked at her and felt nothing. You told me your sister deserved it more, that I was just gonna stand there while you two actually enjoyed it. Those were your exact words. I didn't mean it like that. Yeah, you did. I turned and walked back toward the elevators. Security stepped forward to escort them out. This isn't over, Fiona shouted. I kept walking. The elevator doors closed. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, I got served at work. Fiona had found some bargain bin lawyer willing to write up a demand letter, claiming I owed her damages for the sudden move, emotional distress, and the ring. Owen's brother looked it over and called me that afternoon. This is garbage. The ring's a conditional gift. Condition wasn't met. The apartment was in your name. She's got nothing. He sent a response letter that politely pointed out, I had 8 months of documented grocery receipts and utility payments that could easily be framed as supporting her unemployed sister. The demand letter went away within a week. But Bridget wasn't done being a pain. About a week after the lobby thing, I started getting weird calls at work. Someone would call the main line, ask to speak to me, then hang up when transferred. It happened 4 or 5 times before our receptionist, Dana, started screening. There's a woman who keeps calling for you, Dana told me. Won't give her name, won't leave a message. Sounds pretty hostile, honestly. I had a pretty good idea who it was. Bridget had nothing but time, and apparently decided to spend it making my work life annoying. Then, the social media stuff started. Fiona posted a long rant on Instagram about narcissistic partners and emotional abandonment. She didn't use my name directly, but she dropped enough details that mutual friends figured it out within hours. The post got about 200 likes and a flood of sympathetic comments from people who only knew her version. A few people from our shared friend group reached out asking for my side. I gave them the short answer. Most of them got it immediately. A couple thought I overreacted. One guy I barely knew sent me a long message about how I needed to work on my communication skills. I blocked him too. Here's the thing about these situations. Some people will always take the other side, no matter what. They've already decided who the bad guy is and nothing changes their mind. I stopped caring what any of them thought. The last thing happened over the next 2 months. Owen kept me posted through his network. Fiona and Bridget had moved.
My husband threw tantrums for months, slammed a sauce jar so hard it cracked, flipped the coffee table, and his mom said, boys will be boys. So I threw bigger ones back. I married Nathan after dating for 2 years, and everything was great until we moved in together. We had this nice little duplex with a big kitchen and a backyard where I grew tomatoes and peppers. Nathan worked from home doing consulting, and I worked at the veterinary clinic downtown. We split everything down the middle and took turns cooking dinner. Life was good until about 3 months after the wedding when I saw who Nathan really was. We were at the grocery store and I grabbed the wrong brand of pasta sauce. Nathan grabbed the jar from my hand and slammed it back on the shelf so hard it cracked. The store employee just stared at us. Nathan said the sauce had too much sugar and walked off like nothing happened. I bought the sauce anyway because we needed it for dinner. When we got home, Nathan saw the jar in the bag and threw it in the trash. Then he made himself a sandwich and went to his office. After that, the tantrums started happening all the time. If I bought the wrong coffee creamer, he'd pour the whole bottle down the sink while I was watching. If I forgot to record his show, he'd unplug the TV and carry it to the garage. If dinner wasn't ready when he wanted it, he'd take every pot and pan out of the cabinet and stack them on the counter. The worst was when I came home late from an emergency surgery at the clinic. Nathan had thrown every single pillow and blanket from our bed into the bathtub and turned on the shower. He said if I couldn't be home on time, I didn't deserve a comfortable bed. I slept on the couch that night while he sprawled across our king-size mattress. My friend Lisa kept telling me to leave, but I wanted to handle this myself first. Nathan had this whole routine where he'd throw his fit, storm off to his office, then come back an hour later acting like nothing happened. He'd ask what was for dinner or if I wanted to watch a movie. If I brought up what he did, he'd say I was being sensitive and making a big deal over nothing. One time I tried to talk to him about it calmly, and he threw his coffee mug at the wall. Not near me, but close enough that I jumped. Then he said I was being dramatic about a little noise. His mom came to visit, and I tried to tell her what was happening. She watched Nathan flip the coffee table because I forgot to buy his protein bars, and she said boys will be boys. She actually said that. Then she told me her husband used to break plates when he was stressed, and it was my job to keep Nathan happy. That's when I realized nobody was going to fix this but me. So I started matching his energy. When Nathan threw the remote at the wall because the game was buffering, I picked up his gaming headset and launched it out the back door into the garden. He ran outside and spent an hour looking for it in the dark. When he poured out my expensive shampoo because I took too long in the shower, I took his entire shelf of supplements and protein powder and dumped them in the kitchen trash. He had to dig through coffee grounds and old food to get them back. When he knocked all my makeup off the bathroom counter because I left a hair in the sink, I went to his office and swept everything off his desk onto the floor. His laptop survived, but his coffee went everywhere. Nathan started getting confused. He'd throw his tantrum and wait for me to clean up or apologize, but instead I'd throw a bigger one. He threw a book at the door. I threw 3. He slammed cabinets. I slammed them harder. He started yelling that I was crazy and out of control. I yelled back that I was just expressing my feelings as he did. The breaking point came when Nathan's boss called him for an important video meeting. Nathan was in his office, and I was in the kitchen making lunch. I accidentally dropped a pan, and Nathan came storming out screaming about the noise. So I grabbed every pan we owned and started dropping them one by one. Nathan's face turned this deep red color that started at his neck and spread up to his hairline. His laptop screen showed his boss Winston's face frozen mid-question, and I could hear the tinny voice coming through the speakers asking what all that noise was about. Nathan slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought the screen might crack. He started walking toward me with his hands balled up into fists at his sides, and for a second I thought about backing up or apologizing or doing something to defuse the situation like I always did. But I was still holding that big cast iron skillet in my hand, and something in me just refused to move. Nathan stopped about 3 feet away from me, and we just stared at each other while he breathed really hard through his nose. I could see something different in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Something that looked almost like fear. Like he suddenly realized I wasn't going to back down this time. He opened his mouth like he was going to yell at me, but nothing came out. Then he spun around and punched the hallway wall so hard his fist went straight through the drywall. The sound was this awful crunch, and then he was shaking his hand and cursing, and he walked straight to his office and slammed the door so hard the whole duplex shook. I heard the lock click from where I was standing in the kitchen. I put the pan down on the counter and my hands were shaking. All the other pans were scattered across the kitchen floor like some kind of crazy obstacle course. I started picking them up one by one and putting them back in the cabinet, and my heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. Through the office door, I could hear Nathan talking on his phone, and his voice had this high panicked edge to it that I'd never heard before. I walked closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. He was telling someone that I'd lost my mind, that I'd ruined his important work call on purpose, that he didn't know what to do with me anymore. I realized he was talking to his mother. He kept saying things like, "She's out of control and I can't live like this, and you need to come over here and talk to her." I stepped back from the door and went to sit on the couch in the living room. My phone was on the coffee table and I opened it up to my photos. I'd been taking pictures of everything Nathan destroyed over the past few months without really thinking about why. There was the cracked sauce jar from the grocery store, the soaked bedding in the bathtub, my makeup scattered all over the bathroom floor, the dent in the wall from where he threw his coffee mug, the broken TV remote, my shampoo bottle empty in the sink. I had dozens of photos documenting every single one of his tantrums. Less than an hour later, I heard a key turning in our front door. Nathan must have given his mother a key without asking me because Lorraine just walked right in like she owned the place. She didn't even knock. She came into the living room where I was still sitting on the couch and stood there with her hands on her hips looking at me like I was a misbehaving child. She started in on this lecture about how a wife needs to respect her husband's work time and create a peaceful home environment and be supportive instead of destructive. She said Nathan had important responsibilities and I needed to understand that my behavior was affecting his career. I just sat there listening to her go on, and then I held up my phone. I started showing her the photos one by one without saying anything. The cracked sauce jar, the soaked bedding, my makeup everywhere, the wall damage, the empty bottles. She went quiet as she looked at each photo and her face got this pinched expression like she'd bitten into something sour. When I got to the last photo, she handed my phone back to me and said we both needed to grow up. Not just Nathan. Both of us. Like I was equally responsible for this mess we were living in. Nathan's office door opened and he came out looking all disheveled with his hair sticking up. He and Lorraine went into the kitchen and started having this quiet conversation, but the duplex is small enough that I could hear most of it from the living room. Lorraine told him he needed to handle his wife, and those exact words made my stomach turn. Nathan complained that I'd changed, that I used to be sweet and easy to get along with, that now I was impossible to live with. He didn't mention any of his own behavior, or the fact that he'd been throwing tantrums for months before I started fighting back. Lorraine said something about marriage being hard work, and both people needing to compromise. But then she told Nathan that men sometimes need to be firm with their wives. I wanted to get up and throw something at both of them, but I just sat there on the couch gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. After Lorraine finally left, Nathan came and sat on the opposite end of the couch from me. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever. I looked at the clock on the wall and watched the minutes tick by. 1 hour passed, then another. Neither of us said a single word because what was there even to say at this point? We'd crossed into some kind of territory where normal couple communication didn't work anymore. We couldn't just talk about our feelings or work through our problems like regular people because we'd been destroying each other's stuff and yelling and throwing things for months. The silence was so heavy it felt like something physical sitting between us on the couch. Nathan kept clearing his throat like he was going to say something, but then he'd just shift his position and stay quiet. I stared at the wall where he'd punched the hole and thought about how we were going to have to fix that before the landlord saw it. I thought about how much money we'd wasted on replacing things we'd broken. I thought about how tired I was of living like this. That night, Nathan took a pillow and blanket from the closet and went to sleep in his office. I went to our bedroom and lay down on the bed, but I couldn't fall asleep. I kept staring at the ceiling thinking about everything that had happened. I'd matched Nathan's energy like I thought I was supposed to, like I was standing up for myself and refusing to be pushed around. But lying there in the dark, I realized that matching his tantrums hadn't fixed anything at all. I'd just proved that I could be as destructive as him. We were both living in a war zone that we'd created together. The duplex that used to feel like home now felt like a battlefield. My tomatoes and peppers in the backyard were probably dying because I hadn't had the energy to take care of them in weeks. Everything we'd built together was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I'd thought that fighting back would make Nathan see how awful his behavior was, but instead it just gave him an excuse to say I was crazy too. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen and found Nathan standing by the coffee maker with this big fake smile on his face. He asked me what I wanted for breakfast in this cheerful voice that sounded completely wrong after everything that had happened yesterday. I just stood there staring at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. I told him we needed to talk about what was happening to us, about the fighting and the destruction, and his mother walking into our house uninvited. Nathan's fake smile got even bigger, and he said there was nothing to talk about if I would just stop overreacting to everything. He said we could go back to normal if I would calm down and stop making problems where there weren't any. I felt something break inside me when he said that. Not in a dramatic way, just this quiet realization that Nathan genuinely believed none of this was his fault. He thought I was the problem. He thought if I would just go back to being quiet and accepting his tantrums, everything would be fine. I didn't say anything else to him. I just went back to the bedroom and got ready for work. I drove to the veterinary clinic downtown and walked in through the back entrance like I always did. My coworker Alyssa was in the break room making coffee, and she took one look at my face and asked if everything was okay at home. I opened my mouth to give her my usual response about how everything was fine, but instead I felt my eyes fill up with tears. Alyssa put down her coffee mug and took my arm and led me into the supply room. She closed the door behind us and I just started crying. Not pretty crying either, but the kind where you can't breathe right and your nose runs everywhere. I told her everything. About the pasta sauce at the grocery store, and Nathan throwing things and pouring out my shampoo and soaking our bedding in the bathtub. I told her about how I'd started fighting back and throwing bigger tantrums than his. I told her about the pans yesterday, and Nathan punching the wall and his mother showing up uninvited. Alyssa listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. When I finally stopped talking and wiped my face with a paper towel, Alyssa was quiet for a minute. Then she said very gently that what I was describing sounded like an abusive relationship. I started to argue with her because Nathan had never actually hit me, but she held up her hand. She said abuse wasn't just physical, and that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a scary environment all counted. She said even though I was fighting back now, that didn't make it better. She said 2 people destroying each other wasn't a relationship. It was mutual destruction. She asked me if this was really how I wanted to live for the rest of my life. I stood there in the supply room surrounded by boxes of medical supplies and bags of dog food, and I realized I didn't have an answer to that question. I spent the rest of my shift at the clinic going through the motions of my job, while my brain kept replaying what Alyssa said about mutual destruction. I checked a beagle's ears for mites and thought about Nathan punching the wall. I gave a cat her vaccines and thought about me throwing pans during his work call. I cleaned exam rooms and thought about how we'd both become people I didn't recognize anymore. When I finally drove home that evening, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes staring at our duplex. The lights were on in the kitchen and I could see Nathan moving around inside. Part of me wanted to just keep driving and never come back. But I got out of the car and walked to the front door because running away wouldn't fix anything either. I opened the door and stopped dead in the entryway. The kitchen table was set with our nice plates and cloth napkins we only used for company. Candles were burning in the middle of the table. Takeout containers from my favorite Thai restaurant were arranged on the counter, and the smell of pad Thai and green curry filled the whole house. Nathan came out of the kitchen wearing a smile that looked completely fake after everything that had happened. He asked if I was hungry and gestured at the table like he'd done something amazing. I just stood there holding my purse and staring at this scene he'd created. It was so obvious what he was doing. His mom probably taught him this exact move when he was growing up, watching his dad break plates and then buy flowers the next day. Make a big romantic gesture and pretend the bad stuff never happened. Smooth everything over with fancy food and candles instead of actually talking about the real problems. I walked past him to the bedroom and changed out of my scrubs while Nathan stayed in the kitchen. When I came back out, he was sitting at the table waiting for me with that same fake smile plastered on his face. I sat down across from him and he immediately started dishing pad thai onto my plate. I watched him serve the food and arrange everything just right, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hope, no sadness. Just this empty feeling like I was watching a stranger perform a play I'd seen too many times before. I put my fork down before even taking a bite and told Nathan we needed couples therapy. I said our marriage was falling apart and we needed professional help to fix it. Nathan actually laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, but this dismissive sound like I'd said something ridiculous. He said therapy was for people with real problems like addiction or affairs. He said we just needed to stop being so dramatic about everything and get back to normal. I asked him what normal meant to him, and he said it meant me not overreacting when he got frustrated and him not having to walk on eggshells in his own home. I pointed out that he'd punched a hole in our wall yesterday, and that wasn't frustration. That was violence. Nathan rolled his eyes and said I was making it sound worse than it was. He said lots of guys punch walls when they're mad and it didn't mean anything. I sat there looking at him across the candlelit table with expensive takeout getting cold between us, and I realized he genuinely believed what he was saying. He actually thought punching walls and destroying my stuff and soaking our bedding in the tub was normal behavior that I should just accept. The romantic dinner wasn't an apology. It was a bribe to get me to go back to being quiet and manageable. I stood up from the table and told Nathan I was serious about therapy. He said he wasn't going to waste money on some therapist who would just take my side anyway. I went to the bedroom and closed the door while Nathan stayed at the table eating Thai food by himself. The next morning, I woke up to Nathan's voice coming through the bedroom wall. He was in his office talking loud enough that I could hear every word. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall between our bedroom and his office. Nathan was on the phone with his boss, and his voice had this fake, cheerful tone that made my skin crawl. I heard him say something about construction next door causing noise issues yesterday. He apologized for the disruption to the video meeting and promised it wouldn't happen again. There was a long pause where Nathan wasn't talking, and I figured his boss was responding. Then Nathan's voice got higher and more stressed. He said the construction was unexpected and he'd already filed a complaint with the building management. Another pause. Nathan said he understood the client had been on the call, and he took full responsibility for not warning everyone about potential noise. His voice was getting tighter, and I could tell his boss wasn't buying the construction story. Nathan spent the next hour on damage control calls. I got dressed and ready for work while listening to him talk to different people trying to fix his professional reputation. He called someone named Winston back and spent 20 minutes explaining his home office situation and promising his work quality wouldn't suffer. He called another colleague and asked them to smooth things over with a client who'd been on the disrupted call. Every conversation made him sound more desperate, and I realized his job might actually be in trouble because of what I'd done with the pans. Part of me felt guilty, but a bigger part of me thought about all the times Nathan had made me late for work or disrupted my life with his tantrums, and he never cared about the consequences for me. I was making coffee in the kitchen when someone knocked on our front door. I opened it and found our landlord standing there looking annoyed. He said he'd gotten noise complaints from both neighbors about crashing sounds and yelling coming from our duplex. He asked if he could come in and look around. I let him in because I didn't know what else to do. The landlord walked through our living room and immediately saw the hole Nathan had punched in the hallway wall. He stopped and stared at it for a long time. Then he kept walking and noticed the cabinet door in the kitchen hanging crooked where the hinge had broken during one of our fights. He opened the cabinet and the door came completely off in his hand. The landlord set the broken cabinet door on the counter and turned to look at me. He asked very directly if he needed to be concerned about his property. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathan came out of his office right then, and the landlord's whole face changed. He asked Nathan what was going on with all the damage and noise complaints. Nathan immediately switched into this charming, friendly mode that made me want to throw up. He smiled at the landlord and said everything was fine. He said we'd had some minor accidents, but he was planning to repair everything himself this weekend. He put his hand on my shoulder like we were this happy couple, and I had to force myself not to pull away. The landlord looked at Nathan's hand on my shoulder and then looked at my face. He asked me directly if I felt safe in this house. I froze. Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder. The landlord kept looking at me waiting for an answer, and I couldn't figure out what to say. If I said no, what would happen? Would the landlord call the police? Would Nathan get even angrier? If I said yes, was I lying? Did I actually feel safe here anymore? I finally said I was fine in this quiet voice that didn't sound convincing even to me. The landlord didn't look like he believed me, but he couldn't force me to say anything else. Nathan walked the landlord to the door, still being all friendly and charming. He promised again to fix everything and keep the noise down. The landlord handed Nathan a written warning about the noise complaints and property damage. He said any more problems, and he'd start eviction proceedings. Nathan took the paper and kept smiling until the landlord left. The second the door closed, Nathan's fake smile disappeared. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He turned to me and started yelling about how I'd embarrassed him and made us look like trashy people who couldn't handle our problems. He said the landlord probably thought he was some kind of abuser now because of how I acted. I pointed out that he literally punched a wall yesterday, and the landlord could see the evidence. Nathan said that was different because I'd provoked him by dropping the pans during his meeting. He said if I hadn't started that whole thing, none of this would have happened. I told him he'd been throwing tantrums and breaking stuff for months before I ever fought back. Nathan said I was twisting everything around and making him sound like a bad guy when he was just reacting to my behavior. We stood in the hallway yelling at each other until I couldn't take it anymore and went to the guest room and slammed the door. That night, I got ready for bed in the guest room. I'd brought my pillow and some blankets in there earlier. I was just getting under the covers when I heard Nathan in the hallway. The guest room door opened and Nathan walked in. He didn't say anything, just went straight to the bed and started pulling the mattress off the frame. I asked him what he was doing, and he said if I wanted to sleep separately, then I could sleep on the floor or the couch. He dragged the mattress out of the guest room and down the hall to his office. I heard him shoving furniture around to make room for it. I stood in the empty guest room looking at the bare bed frame and felt something break inside me that hadn't broken before. This wasn't anger or destruction during a fight. This was cold, calculated punishment because I'd tried to set a boundary. I grabbed my pillow and went to the living room couch. I lay there in the dark, listening to Nathan moving around in his office, and thought about how we'd gotten to this point. I thought about the grocery store and the pasta sauce, and how that first tantrum should have been a warning sign. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, or tried to fix things myself instead of leaving. I thought about how I'd started matching his tantrums, thinking it would make him see how awful his behavior was. But instead, it just gave him ammunition to say I was crazy too. The next day at work, my friend Ellie found me in the break room. She'd heard from Alyssa that things were bad at home. Ellie asked if I wanted to come stay at her place for a few days. She had a spare room and said I could have some space to think about what I wanted to do. I sat there with my coffee getting cold in my hands and seriously considered taking her up on it. It would be so easy to just pack a bag and leave for a while. But then I thought about Nathan staying in our duplex acting like he'd won something. I thought about how I'd be the one adjusting and accommodating again while he got to keep his space and his routine. I told Ellie thanks, but I wasn't leaving my own home. Nathan was the one with the problem, and I was tired of being the one who had to leave or change or fix things. Ellie looked worried, but she said she understood. She made me promise to call her anytime, day or night, if I needed help. I promised and went back to work, but I kept thinking about her offer all day. Part of me wondered if I was being stupid by staying. But another part of me was just so tired of running away from problems or trying to make myself smaller, so other people could be comfortable. When I got home that evening, Nathan's office door was closed and locked. I could hear him typing and talking on the phone. I made myself dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table. Nathan stayed in his office until after I went to bed on the couch. The next few days followed the same pattern. Nathan worked long hours with his door locked, and I went to work and came home and we barely saw each other. When we did pass in the hallway, we didn't speak. We were living like hostile roommates who happened to be married. I'd wake up on the couch and hear Nathan already in his office. I'd come home and he'd be in there with the door locked. We stopped cooking meals together. We stopped talking about our days. We stopped existing in the same space except for these brief, awkward moments in the hallway where we'd both look away and keep walking. I realized Nathan was avoiding me as much as I was avoiding him. Neither of us knew how to fix what we'd broken, and neither of us wanted to be the first one to try. So we just lived in this Cold War silence that felt worse than the yelling and destruction had been. I worked a late emergency surgery on a cat who'd eaten something toxic. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. I drove home exhausted and just wanting to collapse on the couch. I unlocked the front door and walked into the dark house. I flipped on the kitchen light and noticed something different right away. There was a new lock on Nathan's office door. Not just the regular door lock, but one of those deadbolts you need a key for. I walked over and tried the handle, and it didn't budge. Then I went to make myself something to eat and found another new lock on the pantry door. I stood there staring at the lock on the pantry where we kept all our food. Nathan came out of his office, and I asked him what he was doing. He said since I couldn't be trusted not to disturb his work, he was protecting his space and his food. I asked him if he was seriously locking up our food, and he said it was his food since he'd bought most of it. He said I could buy my own groceries and keep them somewhere else. Then he went back in his office and locked the new deadbolt behind him. I stood in the kitchen staring at the locked pantry door for a long time after Nathan went back to his office. My stomach growled because I'd worked through lunch at the clinic and now I couldn't even get to my own food. I walked to the garage and grabbed my toolbox from the shelf. Then I went straight to Nathan's office door and unscrewed the router from the wall jack. I unplugged the modem too and wrapped all the cords around both devices. Nathan's door stayed locked while I carried everything out to my car. I popped the trunk and put the router and modem inside, then locked it and took my keys with me back into the house. About 20 minutes later, Nathan came storming out of his office yelling about the internet being down. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone and I told him the internet was fine, just in a safe place. He demanded to know where it was, and I said he could have it back when he unlocked the pantry. Nathan's face went red and he started pacing back and forth in the living room. He pulled out his phone and I watched him turn on his hotspot and connect his laptop to it. He gave me this smug look like he'd won something and went back to his office. I ordered pizza on my phone since I still couldn't get to any real food. The next morning, Nathan was already in his office when I left for work. I could hear him on a video call talking to someone about quarterly projections. That evening when I got home, he was still in there, but I noticed he kept coming out to check his phone. He'd look at the screen, mutter something, then go back to his office. This happened 3 more times before dinner. Finally, around 8 o'clock, he knocked on the living room wall to get my attention. I looked up from my phone and he asked where the router was. I reminded him about the pantry lock and he said that was different because the food was his. I said the internet was mine then since I paid half the bill. He went back to his office and slammed the door. The next day, I came home to find a package on the porch. Nathan must have been watching for it because he grabbed it before I even got my keys out. He took it straight to his office and I heard him ripping open the box. An hour later, I tried to connect to our Wi-Fi network and it was gone. Instead, there was a new network called Nathan's Network and it was password protected. I tried a few obvious passwords, but none of them worked. At work the next day, I was sitting in the break room watching videos on my phone during lunch. Alyssa came in to make coffee and noticed I was using my data instead of the clinic Wi-Fi. She asked why, and I told her about the separate internet networks at home. Alyssa stopped pouring her coffee and just stared at me. She set the pot down very carefully and sat across from me at the table. She said very quietly that what I was describing wasn't normal. She said I was a smart and capable person who didn't have to live like this. I told her I knew it wasn't normal, but I wasn't going to let Nathan push me around anymore. Alyssa reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said matching his crazy didn't make me strong. It just made me participate in something that was destroying me. I pulled my hand back and said I had to get back to work. I avoided Alyssa for the rest of the day because I didn't want to hear what she was saying even though I knew she was right. Nathan started missing deadlines at work. I could hear him on stressed phone calls with his boss through his office door. One afternoon, he was in there for over an hour and I heard him saying he'd have everything done by end of day. That evening, his office door flew open and Nathan came out looking furious. He said Winston had called him in for a serious talk about his performance. He said his boss was threatening to put him on a performance improvement plan. Nathan stood in the hallway and yelled that this was all my fault for being difficult and making his home life so stressful he couldn't focus on work. I was sitting on the couch and I said nobody forced him to spend all his energy on revenge tactics instead of his actual job. Nathan grabbed his briefcase from beside the door and threw it across the room. It hit the wall right next to the hole he'd punched before and made a new dent in the drywall. The briefcase fell to the floor and papers scattered everywhere. There was a knock on the door 10 minutes later. Nathan and I both froze and looked at each other. I got up and opened it to find our landlord standing there with a clipboard. He did not look happy. He said the neighbors on both sides had reported another loud crash and he was done with warnings. He handed me a formal written notice on official letterhead. The notice said any more property damage or disturbances would result in eviction proceedings. He asked both of us to sign it to acknowledge we'd received it. Nathan came to the door and we both signed our names on the form. The landlord took it back and said he'd owned this duplex for 15 years without any problems until we moved in. He looked at both of us and said whatever we were doing to each other needed to stop or we needed to leave. Then he walked back to his car and drove away. Nathan went back to his office without saying anything. I sat on the couch and looked at the 2 holes in the wall and the scattered papers on the floor. I thought about the locked pantry and the separate internet networks, and the way we couldn't even be in the same room anymore. I grabbed my keys and went out to my car. I sat in the driveway with the engine off just staring at the duplex. An hour went by and I still couldn't make myself go back inside. The house had become this place where everything felt like a battle and I was tired all the time. I wasn't afraid Nathan would hit me because he never had. But the whole environment had turned toxic and every day felt like walking through a war zone. I pulled out my phone and just sat there holding it, not sure who to call or what to say. I ended up calling Ellie around 9 that night, still sitting in my car with the engine off. She picked up on the second ring and I could hear her TV playing in the background. I told her everything about the landlord's notice and the separate internet networks, and how Nathan and I were basically living like enemies in the same house. Ellie listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said I could come stay at her place whenever I needed to, that her couch was always available. Then she got quiet for a second before saying, maybe it was time to talk to a lawyer just to understand my options. I thanked her and hung up, then sat there staring at my phone for another 20 minutes before going inside. The next morning, I looked up divorce attorneys during my lunch break at the clinic. I told myself I was just gathering information, not actually planning to leave. I found someone named Patricia Chen who had good reviews and availability that week. I made the appointment for Thursday afternoon and didn't tell Nathan about it. When Thursday came, I left work early and drove to her office in a building downtown. The waiting room had uncomfortable chairs and magazines from 6 months ago. Patricia called me back after 10 minutes and we sat in her office with a big window overlooking the parking lot. She asked about my marriage and I gave her the basic facts about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation. She took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked if Nathan had ever physically hurt me. I said no, he'd never hit me or anything like that. Then she asked about emotional abuse and I froze because I didn't know how to answer that question. Patricia put down her pen and explained that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a hostile environment all counted as forms of abuse even without physical violence. She said what I was describing fit a pattern she'd seen many times before. She pulled out some pamphlets about domestic abuse and support resources, then told me to think carefully about whether I wanted to try to save this marriage or protect myself by leaving. I took the pamphlets and stuffed them in my purse, then drove home in a daze thinking about the word abuse and whether it really applied to my situation. I walked into the duplex to find a strange man working in our kitchen. He was on a ladder patching the hole Nathan had punched in the wall, and there were tools spread out on the counter. Nathan came out of his office when he heard me come in and explained that he'd hired a handyman to fix all the damage before the landlord came back. The handyman glanced between us and kept working, but I could tell he felt uncomfortable. He probably sensed the tension radiating off both of us. I went to the bedroom without saying anything to Nathan and closed the door. Later that evening, after the handyman left, Nathan found me in the kitchen making dinner. He told me in this cold, formal voice that he was fixing everything so we wouldn't get evicted, speaking to me like I was a business partner instead of his wife. I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over a week, just these tactical exchanges about practical matters. He asked what time I'd be home tomorrow, and I told him my usual time. Then he nodded and went back to his office. I ate dinner alone at the table looking at the freshly patched wall. At work the next day, Alyssa cornered me in the supply room and asked how things were going at home. I tried to brush her off, but she wouldn't let it go. She said I looked exhausted and stressed and she was worried about me. I finally admitted that Nathan and I were barely speaking and living like hostile roommates. Alyssa said even if Nathan wouldn't go to couples counseling, I needed to talk to someone because this situation was clearly taking a toll. She pulled up a therapist's website on her phone and showed me the profile for someone named Heidi Molina, who worked with relationship issues and trauma. I took a picture of the screen and promised Alyssa I'd think about it. I called Heidi's office that afternoon and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. The receptionist asked what I wanted to work on, and I said relationship problems, which felt like a massive understatement. When Tuesday came, I left work at 4 and drove to Heidi's office across town. She met me in the waiting room, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Her office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I started talking about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation, and everything that had happened over the past months. Saying it all out loud to a stranger made me realize how completely abnormal our situation had become. Heidi asked what I wanted to get out of therapy, and I opened my mouth to say I wanted to fix my marriage, but the words wouldn't come out. I sat there staring at the tissue box and realized I didn't even know if I wanted to save my marriage anymore. Heidi didn't push me for an answer. Instead, she started asking about Nathan's behavior patterns and my responses to them. She explained that what I was describing followed a classic abuse cycle, even though Nathan wasn't hitting me. She said my retaliation was a trauma response to feeling powerless in my own home. Then she said something that hit me hard, that matching his destructiveness didn't give me power back. It just made me participate in my own harm. I left that session feeling like someone had taken everything I thought I knew about my situation and turned it upside down. I kept seeing Heidi twice a week after that first appointment. Over the next few sessions, things started getting clearer in my head. I'd been so focused on proving I wouldn't be pushed around that I'd lost sight of whether this relationship was even worth fighting for. Nathan hadn't changed at all since I started matching his tantrums. He'd just gotten sneakier about his control tactics, like locking the pantry and creating separate internet networks. I was exhausted from constantly being on guard in my own home. Heidi helped me see that I deserved better than living in a war zone, whether I stayed with Nathan or not. 3 weeks into therapy, Nathan's mother called me directly for the first time in weeks. I was sitting in my car outside the clinic after work when her name popped up on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me.